Hello, my name's Richard Diver, and I am joined by my colleague Rin Ewer, author of the SOC Process Framework. This is video 6 in an 8-part series, and in this video, we're going to take a deep dive into business processes and procedures. We recommend that you follow along by opening the workbook in your own Azure Sentinel instance. So if you don't have that open, pause the video, go there now, get the video started again afterwards. All right, hopefully you've paused, you've come back. Rin, let's get into this session and talk about the business processes and procedures.
All right, thank you, Richard. I love it. Let's dive in. So here within the workbook, you can clearly see that we have clicked on the SOC Business Process and Procedures link within the workbook. And within that first section, we have Business Measurement Process Metrics. As we've called out within this workbook, we have our table of contents with our top level buttons highlighted in blue and our subsequent buttons highlighted in white within this table. So let's kind of dive in and talk a little bit about how we're thinking of the business measurement process and metrics. And this is a really important portion of building out your security operations for your business and looking at how to drive the right type of measurements, KPIs or OKRs, right? To name a couple of acronyms, right? That's objectives or key results is what OKRs are. Those key components, those key initiatives and measurements and things that you want to measure within your business, and that's really what we're doing here. So within the business measurement process, we've kind of scoped out metrics to measure around, categories defined within a security awareness. So we're looking around 4 categories. We've got security awareness, we have effectiveness and efficiency, technology, and skills and capabilities. So as you're thinking about leveling up your security practice, you want to be thinking about what to measure around those things, right? How do you apply those measurements around security awareness? What does that look like? As you're bringing in that awareness could leverage the way that you're delivering on monitoring and the analytics that you're deploying within your business. On the effectiveness and efficiency, it's how well that monitoring is working. It's also how well the analysts are responding to the monitoring in a timely fashion and, turning those incidents into remediation efforts. What does that look like as they're stepping through the incident response process and framework that we've talked about in our previous sessions? And then next, we have technology and the skills and capabilities. So on the technology side, it's how well is that technology performing? Are we receiving that return on investment? Do we need to continue to mature and level up in the way that technology is being integrated, the way that the analysts are leveraging that technology? Are there bottlenecks in time and efficiency to leveraging that? Could that be related to the skills and capabilities within the personnel and how they're leveraging the technology and the way it's integrated with other tools within your security portfolio? So thinking about all of those things really brings around about the type of metrics and the program that you want to put in place. And so we've called out some of those pieces here. There could be gaps that you want to look at that could be ineffective areas, lacking processes, or even limitations within your technology. Maybe even skill sets that are unavailable to the personnel. And so looking at all of those areas, driving towards that, making sure that you're leveling your employees, you're helping them develop those skills, you're helping them be more capable. That's going to drive efficiency. The more efficient that you are, that's going to be able to close the gap on some of these areas. So that's kind of what the scope and the process summary of this looks like. Now, we kind of look at a couple of examples around a KPI is calculating the number of incidents per analyst hour, or IPAH, right? IPAH, incidents per analyst hour. That helps us to drive how efficient an analyst is performing and doing the triage response, right? Looking at the type of investigations that they're looking at. And so that EPA may differ. We talked about how that EPA may differ from a tier 1 analyst to a tier 2 to a tier 3, because on a tier 1 they may be doing a lot of triage, queuing, and getting things prepped and ready for the tier 2, tier 3 analysts who are going to spend a little bit more deeper time in those investigations, where they may have to call out to an external resource for looking at the resource, who owns that resource, and what type of assessments, containments, remediation steps, and planning that they need to do in order to deliver on that level of excellence. So keeping in mind that those things may shift as you're driving through that. Down below here, then we have kind of our metrics definition process. We're kind of looking at defining what those business questions to answer are. What are those requirements? And how do we document the tracked metrics to this procedure, right? And so this is an area where we want to call some of these pieces out, but you may, within your line of business, be thinking about OKRs or KPIs that are important to measure within your business that we've not thought of or called out. That's okay. This is really where that workbook is flexible, and you should be thinking about those things, what those measurements need to be, and then bringing in those measurements, defining part of those measurements within the metrics and definition process. So all of this can be modified and updated to fit your line of business, and so you should be thinking about it from that perspective. You should be looking at what data sources do I need to identify, and how to answer the requirement for that, and having an onboarding metric that you're snapping to, how to analyze the data or develop appropriate content to capture the signals and intelligence out of that data, looking at metrics and content within an appropriate time frame as documented within the process. So these are important things to consider.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this in some previous videos. This is obviously different depending on whether you've got an in-house team and you're doing this yourselves, and then you decide how many resources you have or how many more you might need, versus whether you've outsourced this to a partner and you've got a MSSP partner that's actually managing this for you. Either way, it's good to know what you expect from the security team to understand when you need more or less of that. And also when you go to buy new technologies, the idea of the new technology and the promise of the new technology is going to make life easier or better and make you more secure. So you want to measure that and say, yes, before X technology, we were doing ABC, and now we've made the investment, we've implemented it and embedded it. Now our processes are quicker, faster, we're finding less problems or more problems or whatever the circumstance might be. So I think that's where you refine this over time. And if you are unfortunate enough to have to go through some kind of major incident, the lessons learned of majors or any minor incident should be folded back into this to ensure, again, that you're measuring to improve next time the detection and the response capabilities. Very good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that call out, Richard. I think you're absolutely right. Any lessons learned, any post-mortem should be folded into this overall process and looking at whether or not you've measured effectively, right? And then are the metrics and things that you're currently looking at, do they need to be increased? And should there be other metrics to be considered during this process? And during the overall process as it snaps to the other areas within building out your security operations. You can see here we've also called out roles and responsibilities and process linkages, as well as related processes and procedures, and then who kind of owns this all up. The SOC manager should own the business requirements and the business metrics and definitions, right? They should be thinking about who, what, when, where from the metrics side of the house, and how to apply those metrics to their people, to the technology, and to those 4 categories that we talked about a little bit earlier within the process here. So that security awareness, that effectiveness and efficiency, technology and skills and capabilities. And my advice around this section would be this: if you feel like you need to, spend a little bit of time putting an outline underneath each of these 4 areas, because these 4 areas can be quite broad. we recommend that you do that. If you want to think through what does security awareness mean, what is effectiveness and efficiency and technology and skills and capabilities, and kind of get to the more tactical side of what those measurements need to be, we recommend that you definitely do that. Dive into that a little bit there and spend some time kind of updating this section of the workbook so that if you want to add that granularity, you certainly can. Underneath here, we have a couple of workbooks that we've tied directly to the business measurement process. So what we've done in this section of the workbook is very efficient for you. So as you're developing other KPIs or measurements and reporting within the Azure workbook framework for Azure Sentinel, you can go and add additional buttons in this section and kind of increase out where those metrics may be found. So in here, what I've done is we called out the SOC Efficiency Metrics. And the SOC Efficiency Metrics is a fantastic workbook. It's found in the workbook gallery. And it is to complement the security incidents table. So it's an out-of-the-box security operations efficiency workbook that you can use to monitor your SOC operations. It is also customizable, but what we've done is we've highlighted some of the following metrics. So incidents created over time, incidents created by closing classification, severity, owner, and status, mean time to triage, as well as closure, and incidents created by severity, owner, status, product, and statistics, tactics, that's the MITRE tactics, over time. And then from there, we dive into things like time to triage percentiles and time to closure percentiles, as well as mean time to triage per owner, and recent activities and recent closing classifications. Now, this doesn't mean that this has to be all of the metrics. Again, this is a type of workbook that you could increase the efficiency metrics and add additional metrics as you think of them, where those could apply. But what we've done is we've called out a screenshot of where that workbook lives inside the workbook gallery, and then kind of given you an overview of this workbook. And so as you update an incident, log an entry, add something to that incident, change the ownership, change the severity, add comments or tagging, all of that then is tracked here within the Security Operations Efficiency Workbook, so that you're able to come in and truly drive the right type of KPIs that can snap back to your line of business. The next workbook is our SOC Analytics Efficiency Metrics. This is critical because we're looking at this from a way that the monitoring and alerting is truly efficient and operating within your environment. So this workbook is looking at alert rules from a holistic view. It's looking at alerts and pulling those alerts and detections into incidents. And then, giving those number of incidents and how that funnel system looks, right? From events to alerts, from alerts to incidents, so that you can now see how effective are these alerts to incidents and what that looks like overall. The way that this works, and we've kind of made this live, this section here, so that you can kind of see how to click on it. You see it in the incidents blade of Azure Sentinel. You can go and then highlight which alerts that you want to go look at, and then have the workbook do what's called a rule analysis on those rules, so that you can see how often they're firing, how much data around the rule firing is being generated, how many incidents are they creating, how noisy is it, do you need to tune it, right? And so that's the type of analysis that this workbook is going to give you, so that you can improve on the efficiency and efficacy of the rules and the monitoring portion, right, of the categories that we've kind of talked about within the business process overall. So these two workbooks kind of work in conjunction with each other. You can imagine that you could add an additional button here, as I kind of highlighted earlier, to if you have other workbooks that you want to call out that fit within the business measurement process or metric process, as we like to call it within your SOC. This is another area where you can continue to expand and grow and mature within your business model. All right, let's step into process improvement. This is a process improvement is going to contain process maturity, Agile methodology, and our documentation standards. So we're going to focus a little bit on this here within this section. So within process improvement, we have our purpose, our scope, and our summary. And the way that we're kind of thinking about process improvement, and we pulled a lot of this together based on the way that we're thinking about it internally at Microsoft. We leverage the capability and maturity model for integration. We also leverage within that model, right, some other things that we're going to talk about within the process improvement posture. So, but for right now, let's kind of focus on the capability maturity model for integration, or CMMI for short. And the way that we're thinking about that is how to elevate the maturity and effectiveness of your security operations processes and procedures on a biannual basis. This allows you to kind of review how those processes are impacting your business, whether or not those processes have gaps or areas of limitation. And so leveraging the capability maturity model helps you to identify kind of where those are. And this is supported, right, by the Agile methodology procedure. It's supported by the process maturity and our documentation standards. So we want to lead out by each of those areas. So in order to kind of dive into some of this around the process maturity procedures, we want to document detailed steps that allow us for a continuous process improvement. And the reason for that is due to the rapid rate of change that we see within information security, within security practices all up. We know that the attacks are going to change. We know that lines of business have to adapt, and within the adapting of that line of business, attackers are going to adapt with you. So being able to be agile gives you the flexibility to quickly identify areas of limitation and gaps within your process model. And that's really what this is set out to do. Here we have a table. This is our CMMI level. Level 1 is kind of ad hoc and chaotic. Level 2 is repeatable, which is definitely great. And then level 3 is defined, where we have combinations of level 1, level 2, and level 3. When we get to level 4 now, we're managing that, the definitions of that, the repeatability of that, and even some of the chaotic pieces that may still come in as things ebb and flow. And then finally, level 5 is that level of optimization, right? To get a nice rounded CMMI level, I really recommend that you start out with level 3. You want to try to achieve a level 3 where you get to a defined level. You know what your processes are, you know what your metrics are, they're repeatable. And if you have things that are ad hoc or chaotic, you can bring them in and you have a process, a framework that you can snap those pieces to something that is repeatable and defined so that they're less chaotic. That's really what you're going for. And then anything that you can achieve after that to really start to, amplify and level up on the managed and optimization side, fantastic, right? But that sweet spot that you really want to start targeting, early on is level 3. It's that defined section. And then we kind of call out roles and responsibilities again, and additional process linkages, and who owns this. This again is owned by the SOC manager. They should be thinking about what the process maturity needs to look like. If there are areas within your business that you feel that you're doing differently within the process improvement portion of this, we highly recommend that this is the section, this is the area where you modify this area of the workbook and snap your business processes to this, right? You may already have ways of delivering on process improvement. Fantastic. right? Merge that in with this framework that you see here. Make any changes within this workbook, make it your own, make it so that everyone in your business understands what those are, and they're all speaking the same language. And I think, Richard, as we have talked through these series of video sessions, that is a reoccurring theme, is making sure everyone is talking on the same language.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think also this matters to any size team. This doesn't just have to be the large, organized 20, 30, or 100 people in a SOC team, but even if you're a 3-person team or you're the only security person, a lot of this makes sense to ensure that you understand how you can do better at security, especially in the quiet days. So I think we've said it before in other meetings, other sessions, but in the quiet days when you're not firefighting, these are the times when you can sit back and think about, well, how would I approach this next time and how can I improve? And I think that's just a continuous career improvement as well. Everybody wants to get better at this, and nobody wants to come in tomorrow to go to work and suddenly have a really bad day. And a lot of this just helps ensure whatever you have to face in any industry, you shouldn't have a really bad day. You have a plan, you know what to do. Everyone's going to work together as a well-oiled machine and not chaotic. Try to stay away from being chaotic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, right. I like that you called that out, a well-oiled machine. And that's really what that level 3 defined gives you, is processes are defined, metrics are defined, roles are defined, what part each person plays in this framework is defined. And so when you hit that level, right, then you can deploy tabletop exercises, and you can really start to test the framework, test your processes and your procedures, and identify those gaps. And that's really where the maturity model is going to take off. It's going to grow, because once you have those areas defined, then it's a matter of putting it into practice. All right, this next section is the Agile methodology section. Words are hard today. And within this section, we're leveraging, right, the Martin Fowler agility. And so if you know anything about Martin Fowler, we have a link here to the new methodology from his article, and the practices that are understood and documented within Agile methodology. So we're kind of applying this to SOC operations. It's an interesting approach, because now we're looking at agility within SOC and how to deliver on continuous improvement around our processes and procedures. So that extends out past technology to people. So we're looking at skills. We're looking at how the skills and the individuals then work within the technology premise, and then how the technology elevates the processes and the framework that we're laying out, right? So each of these pieces, they have a part to play, and they fit together within an organization, right? And so the idea here is to deliver on a continuous refinement of operations to obtain a better performance across all services. That's what we're after. And leveraging this type of Agile methodology gives us the ability to kind of look at how we want to respond to a zero-day exploit, for example, or the deployment of new technology systems, or any use case that meets an objective to maximize the effectiveness of our operations around people, process, and technology. That is really what Agile methodology gives us. And so a couple of areas that we have broken down is awareness, balance, and agility, and then the Agile procedures. So let's kind of break these down a little bit. For awareness, that's our monitoring and response. So how the organizational strategy is first looped in. How do we make those call outs? Who are we responding along with? Is this part of a SOC tier 1, tier 2, right? Are we escalating to an incident responder? Are we making a call out to an external team with contextual knowledge about a service, about the ownership of applications or services within their line of business, right? Those are important things to consider when we're talking about awareness. So that strategy needs to reflect on the organizations, the missions, and the vision statement around that line of business. And again, the mantra of do no harm, right? So that we're snapping to that, and everyone knows their part to play as we're elevating that awareness, and we're snapping to the right areas of monitoring and response. And then we're bringing in the incident response process procedures. We're bringing in that assess and contain procedures. We're looking at how to do host-based analysis. All of these things that we've talked about across these sessions, they really come to play here, as we kind of break some of these pieces out. Balance then takes us into improving our existing process posture. So now we're looking at the efficiency and efficacy of these processes. How do we apply constant adjustment and fine tuning? Do we apply tabletop exercises? How often do we do them? How do we make adjustments to our documentation and our processes? That should be done through, lessons learned that you called out, Richard, from postmortems, minor or major incidents. Any of those kinds of activities should give us the information that we can come back and improve on these existing processes and drive the right type of defined balance that we're calling out here. So we're improving on the detect, identifying errors and gaps and areas of improvement, and driving the overall efficiency. This next area is agility. This is looking at creating new operations, processes, procedures, and or capabilities. So this is why this is important, is you have kind of that cyclical way of driving the agility within your operations and the insights that you're pulling from that. And so in here, you may identify those gaps, and where those gaps are called out, we want to create new operations. We want to make sure that we're filling that gap. And when we identify those new areas that we need to address, that we're snapping to those things, whether they're issues, threats, opportunities, even new capabilities, doesn't matter. That's really going to fit into the agility phase of our Agile methodology. So then, once we kind of have that, and we know how to fit to each of these, we can apply a procedure, the Agile procedure. And so that's really what we've done here, is we're looking at how to break this down. So we've got rapidly deployed documentation, first drafts, leveraging initial draft and process into the daily operations. This is where that first draft could be called into your daily operations call, right? That you're testing it, you're building it into the people process, helping them understand what they need to leverage, and then from there, right, that subject to the draft of that continuous improvements, you're now bringing in management, you're bringing in daily use, and you're helping to identify that improvement or changes that need to be made immediately to any of the documentation or to the process knowledge base as a whole. That's really what you're doing here. So we would leverage this workbook. We call that out here, the SOC Process Framework, to kind of keep that agility going. So if you're thinking through new processes, you're adding new links into the framework, you're adding new pages, you're building out that process, right? And so you're increasing the amount of content that would potentially live within this workbook to offset any of those gaps and creating those new operations, those new processes and procedures.
Yeah, it's really good to see this, Rin, especially Agile. So I've been on a few Agile projects over the years, and it's interesting how it gets taken by people that hear Agile and think software development, which is obviously where it originally came from. And then they also start to go the other way and go, oh, that means no change control. We can just do whatever we want. It's that fine balance between giving the power and the freedom to the team to be able to do what they need to do to get the job done versus having some kind of procedures and control and change control. But I don't want to have to wait till next Wednesday to raise a change control to solve a security problem that just happened 5 minutes ago. There's a certain amount of give and take on being able to react and respond, which is the agility side, versus ensuring that everything is well documented and understood what action we took and why we did it. And again, just ensuring that we're always improving the way we do things and not saying, well, we've always done it that way, so we're going to continue doing it until something changes. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to see how this is adopted. And I think it's written really well here to try to explain it.
I appreciate that. I agree. I think it'll be fun, for those that are viewing these sessions, as you're thinking through what agile procedures you want to deploy, above and beyond what we've crafted here within this workbook. That's really where we can continue to learn, develop, and grow together as a community of security practitioners, right? And that's the exciting portion of this workbook. Is this workbook's going to take on a life of its own, depending on who the customer is, who the partner is, what the line of business is, and how they're thinking of securing that line of business. That's exciting. It's exciting to see what that's going to look like as they're kind of expanding this out and really adapting to their own terminology, their own nomenclature, things that they've got built in-house, things that they know that they need to snap to, right? It really will take on a life of its own. And I want it to. We want it to grow with you. We want it to be a framework that you're building on, right? That it's foundational, but that it can be, it can be modified, it can be changed, it can grow with you, and that's the exciting thing. I think that this workbook offers that level of agility, I guess. Where kind of pun intended here. We're talking about agility operations, but it really is that. We wanted to build a workbook that was agile in practice and agile in content. All right. Last but not least is our documentation standards. And the documentation standards is really straightforward. We have our description, and I'm just gonna kind of gloss over that a little bit, because down below under our procedures, we kind of have a Visio diagram. And I'm just gonna kind of talk to this, but if you want more of that step-by-step, if you like that, we certainly have that as well. And so in this documentation procedures flow, it's more about, how do I update a procedure? How do I add a procedure? What do I want to do within this workbook? So we thought about that. It's like, okay, let's actually put that to the test. And let's, have you log into Azure Sentinel through the portal, navigate to this workbook, click edit. Right? And if the desired topic exists, if no, then you're following those next steps. You're creating a new procedure page. You're adding that text page. You're adding appropriate description and title header and who owns it. And any links to the tabs on the main topic menu, and any other procedural documentation and steps that you want to add to that. That's what's so important about this, is we're calling out each of those areas so you can be creative. You can think about the data that snaps to these steps and processes, and you're not worried about how to do it. You're more worried about the creative side and what it is that I need to document, and how do I fill that gap on my procedural flow. So really, this is kind of how this looks, right? You've kind of got that overall Visio where, am I updating an existing topic within this workbook? Or am I creating a new topic to, build out the type of, maturity that I know that I've got a gap in my line of business. And so I want this to kind of be that single source of truth. And that's really what we're hoping for, is this will become your single source of truth for your SOC operations. And you're leveraging this to continue to level up and mature out each of your processes for your business. So from here, if you're stepping into creating a topic, you're setting that topic parent, but then each of those areas, right, are on that standardized TOC, the modifying description, procedures, flow charts, if any, saving your topic, right? Again, kind of going back to that top level steps that we highlighted earlier. If it's updating an existing topic, it's the same. You're rinsing and repeating that procedure in these steps in how you want to update this workbook. And so we kind of thought through that for you so that you can really focus on the things that are important on this level of maturity within your workbook. All right, that covers the process improvement section. So now we have a couple of other sections that we want to talk about. This kind of takes us away from process improvement. This now kind of gets us into the business maturity model around compliance as well as business continuity, disaster recovery, a couple of other areas that are important to the overall business. And so let's kind of dive into each of these. Again, we have our high level. Our high level is kind of our purpose, our scope, and our process summary. And within this, purpose and scope, we're really kind of thinking through from a compliance perspective, how can you leverage your compliance initiatives within Azure Sentinel? That's really what we're thinking about here. We're thinking about how to onboard, procedures around compliance support that meets your security policies or corporate regulatory requirements, and be able to drive those regulatory compliance in a way that is important to your business. So that's really what we're doing here. We're calling out some regulatory drivers, and we have some additional workbooks, some things to consider. So there is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. This is a link to that. Each of these are links, but we also have a CMMC workbook. And so within the CMMC workbook, this gives us the ability to dive directly into the overall maturity model certification for this area. On the PCI, or payment card industry, we've got some links there. SOC, Sarbanes-Oxley, and health insurance portability and HIPAA, as well as any general privacy best practices for personal information, right? The PII side of things. On the compliance process at a high level, we're thinking through 9 areas, right? Developing the appropriate use case documentation, leveraging workbooks or built-in reports and templates that we come out of the box within the workbook gallery. Leveraging those use cases to build out procedures within the design process, or determining priority for implementation. Looking at identifying specific content to be generated through Azure Sentinel. That's important, right? Because each of that content could uniquely pull out levels of signaling and intelligence that tie back to the overall compliance process. So depending on how you have those built into your environment, you may want to think about where you identify specific content that meets this area. Design and implement Azure Sentinel use case components. Those components could be watch lists. Those components could be playbooks, other workbooks, and content that you can snap to within the framework of Sentinel itself. Alerts, as they're tied to compliance areas, compliance violations, and monitoring for those compliance initiatives. And then validating output and reporting mechanisms, looking to make sure that you understand where that compliance is, especially where you may have auditors come in and they want to identify, are you meeting those regulatory compliance initiatives? And so checking some of those boxes are important to this level of the process. Having a compliance owner, right? And snapping that compliance owner so that they are validating that output. They know what that is. And they know how to be able to communicate that output effectively. And then updating any of those components and reporting mechanisms where applicable, and doing so on a regular basis, making sure that you're continuing to update and mature these processes over time. So this is really kind of where then we get into that metrics section, looking at what those reports are. Contract progress, use cases defined and completed. And so these are just a couple of ideas and things that we've called out here. You may think of more. This is where that area would be that you want to continue to massage and level this up. And then again, we have our roles, responsibilities, and any additional processes as it snaps to this section. And then who owns it, right? This should be owned by the SOC manager and continue to deliver on that from their perspective.
And I'm going to reiterate again, I did this 20 years ago when I was in IT, just coming into it as a new person. So it's, even if you've been through a SOC process before, or you've been through any kind of audit before, it's not fun. And it can take 2 or 3 days worth of your time out just to go and answer questions. So the more you have this written down and available, I remember, it's like a painful memory in the back of my head now of when somebody just comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, can I ask you about this? And you're expected to know where that is and what it is and what to do. And you might not have got taught that yet because you're too new at the job. And that doesn't look good on the audit. So again, as much as this is maybe seen as tedious work that a lot of people might not want to do on a day-to-day basis, somebody has to do it. And I think everybody in the team needs to at least be aware of it, understand where to go, get them to look through it now and again. And for the new people coming in, quiz them on it and make sure they're aware of it. If you have taken the time to document this, make sure everyone's aware of it so that when the auditors do turn up, you're not suddenly taking a whole day, week, or month of your life trying to answer these questions and scramble for the documentation. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Absolutely. All right, so that's kind of our high level compliance. Under compliance support, really, and I'm just going to scroll down slowly so you kind of get an idea. This page is just filled with all kinds of goodness around security compliance initiatives, as well as the detailed compliance support steps to kind of think through things. So, yeah, painful memories for sure. We had our fair share of audits within internal Microsoft as kind of building some of these pieces out. But this section is really to help augment in more detail some of the things that you want to consider around the scope of compliance support, right? So we've got a section here, procedure description. This is calling out to what steps you're going to take in this procedure. And so step one is to do an initial review. Step two is listing out applicable policies and standards. Step three is looking at all content being developed and where that content is applied. And then step four is understanding during normal and abnormal operations, things that are to be expected and how to adhere to and enforce the applicable policies. That is important, right? And then that last step is that regulatory compliance procedures are to be included within the compliance support topic. So above and beyond this, making sure that you're flushing each of those policies and standards out, and that you're adhering within the way that you're delivering the efficiency to your monitoring portions of your incident response process and procedures within this framework. That's really what this is. And so there's a lot of meat here. There's a lot of detail that we've thought through and how to apply these things. Where to, so let's step into kind of applicable policies and standards for a second. This is kind of calling out internal policies. We've named quite a few here with links. Again, CMMC, FedRAMP, NIST, PCI, SOX, the healthcare or HIPAA, and any general privacy best practices overall that NIST, CSRC and NIST gives us across the board there. So really great material here. If you're not familiar with some of these things, highly recommend that you dive into this section. And then on the process procedure section, we've got a lot of really good call outs. If you want to continue to massage this area, and build this out, we recommend that you do that. But we've really thought through this for you. There's some good meat here that we hope that you'll keep, that we hope that you'll leverage. So a couple of additional call outs here is, Office 365 configuration against a compliance framework, or validation of Azure configuration, again, required across a compliance framework. Or looking at related processes and procedures and how to deliver that across event management. And then what we've done is we've added some Azure Security Center compliance and protection workbooks that you can load within the workbook gallery within Sentinel. So Sentinel is now connected to Azure Security Center from a compliance perspective, is reading and pulling in that data, and is giving you a lot of compliance initiatives so that you can see where within your infrastructure you're compliant. And you can deliver that all within a single pane of glass within the workbook structure of Sentinel. So that's huge, right? That we've thought through to integrate those pieces. And then we're giving you some great examples of how this workbook is going to operate. And we're these pieces into this section of the workbook within the SOC process side of the workbook, right? So that there's no guesswork. You can come in here, you can see how some of these pieces are working for you before you go and deploy, right? That's really what we want to do, is we want to provide knowledge and drop the kind of informational knowledge that you're going to need as you're integrating solutions and you're standing up the type of compliance that is important for your line of business. All right, so just kind of scroll down here, kind of give you a little bit more view of some of the things that we call out within those workbooks. Then down below, we have our detailed support steps around compliance. So this is kind of looking more on step one. We need to receive the compliant requirements. We need to receive them from the business. And what are they, right? So the compliance team is going to provide logging and reporting requirements. They're going to determine what needs need to be met by the SOC operational process. So they're going to partner with the SOC manager and the analysts to deliver on what those requirements are going to be. Then step two is identifying data sources. Where does that data come from? Who are the data business owners? And then developing a list of data sources necessary to meet those requirements collected in step one. We want to identify system owners that are going to maintain that data. They're also going to be on the hook to require and are going to be required to meet logging and reporting requirements because they're snapping to that compliance regulatory statute. Right? So they know that they've got to meet that, and they're asking for your help to be able to help drive that and deliver this. And that's really what we're doing here around the identify of data sources. Couple more options there. We want to provide system owners with steps necessary, and we want to continue to review those requirements and those steps and make alternate recommendations where applicable and available. Step three is adding the data sources into Sentinel. So we want to turn those on. We want to ingest that data. We want to coordinate with the system owners, and we want to provide support so that those system owners can they understand how to onboard that data. Right? This may be where you're also partnering with the SOC engineering team, right? Because they're the ones responsible for that ingestion of data, making sure that that data is, efficiently being collected, and the efficacy of that data is valuable for pulling out the right signals and intelligence. So that's critical. So partnering with them will be an essential portion of this step. Step four then is creating reporting. From the measurements and requirements, from the requirements gathered. In step one, we want to generate trends, queries, and reports to meet the reporting criteria. We want to look at how those reports can be automated and can be distributed, right? And so we can provide role-based access models to those reports and give ownership to those reports, right? So those reports may live inside Sentinel around an Azure workbook, but we can apply role-based model access to those reporting to help them be able to see those things while being able to keep the containment of our SOC process, technology, and tools that we're leveraging, to the SOC as a whole, right? And so that's really kind of where the role-based access comes into play. And there's some pieces that we've talked a little bit about that role-based access in an earlier session that you may want to go back and review that so that you understand at a component level how to apply some of that role-based access where that reporting needs to meet, these needs for senior leaders or leaders that may be outside the SOC that need access to this level of reporting. Step five then is reviewing and approving reporting content and scheduling that with the compliance team. So kind of looking at once those reports have been generated and verified, the data that we're pulling meets the data that is being ingested, right? We've worked with system owners. We understand how to apply it in a meaningful way. We're pulling out the right signals and intelligence, right? Then we can start to conduct periodic reviews of that reporting. And that becomes part of the process maturity cycle. That becomes part of the pieces that we've talked about a little bit earlier in that process maturity cycle, as well as in the business metrics cycle. So this would become part of those metrics, and the reviewing of that data would then become part of that overall maturity model that we build into the process cycle itself. We've got a compliance status matrix here. This is kind of where you may have certain people that fit, or own certain areas within the complaint statutes that you're snapping to. And so in here, I've kind of called out a couple of things, right? This person may be responsible for SOX, or this person may be responsible for, PCI or CMMC, and then stepping through, steps and status. Have they received their requirements? Have they identified data sources? Have those data sources been onboarded? And do they understand what they need to edit or create to build out that reporting? And has it then been reviewed and approved across the board? So, and you could think about it this way. This is a great way to onboard other data or even use cases as a whole outside of compliance and the initiative work that fits to the compliance regulatory model. So any type of use case, right? It really comes down to what is that use case requirements? Have I identified the data sources that meet those requirements? Have I onboarded those data sources? And then building out the content that supports those requirements and pulls out that right signaling and intelligence, right? As I'm mapping to tactics and techniques that an attacker may leverage. So even though we've built this out under the compliance status matrix, you can imagine this level of a matrix being applied for other use cases other than just compliance. And then we've called out supporting processes. And again, who owns this? This would be owned by the process manager, but would be in collaboration with the business owners as you're identifying and bringing in those data sources. All right. A lot of good information here on the compliance side. Next is our business continuity and disaster recovery process. And this is something that every business has to a degree. They're thinking about business continuity, but they're also thinking about how do we recover from a disaster? What does that look like? So this section is for you to have those plans. Within your business, you may already have processes and procedures around business continuity and disaster recovery. Fantastic. Our goal is to then be able to leverage this section so that you can snap those here and really kind of flush this out. If you don't have those, this is a framework, a place to start, a foundational area that you can consider to then build out your own business continuity and disaster recovery processes for your business. Some of the things that we're thinking about is around the planning process. What scenarios do you need to meet? How are those scenarios delivered on impact? Right? Developing detailed recovery plans around each scenario that establish objectives. What's the objective? What's the overall goal? What are we hoping to achieve, with the detailed plan that we have, right? How do we pull out of a disaster and recover? What does that look like? What does recovery look like across each line of business that may need to support that plan? And so as you're thinking about it from your line of business, or partnering with a managed service provider, or partnering with consultants, or just building it in-house, right, and leveraging your service owners, you've got to be thinking through what does that look like, those recovery time objectives, right, or that recovery point objectives. That's what RTO and RPO, those are some of the KPIs that we want to make sure we're measuring. Test recovery plans on an annual basis and evaluating the effectiveness of those plans regularly, and then reviewing those plans, right? So that's really what we're doing here, is we're calling out what that process might look like. But you may have those in more detail, and that's wonderful. And so you can snap those details here. So this is kind of the high level for that. What we have done, though, is giving you some supporting URLs. So around business continuity and disaster recovery, because we're a cloud-based service, one of the things that we want to provide are supporting URLs for those services. So what we've done is we've gone and we've pulled out the service level objective for log analytics and the service level agreement for overall Azure for any service that runs in Azure. This is important because as you're building out your business continuity and your disaster recovery plans, and your infrastructure may be cloud-based, you want to understand what are those SLAs for those services in the cloud, right? And even if you have a hybrid model that may be outside of Azure, on-prem or in another cloud, you're going to want to know what those service level agreements are for those other areas, whether they're on-prem or other cloud providers. So this is what we've done is we've removed that guesswork and we've kind of put those supporting URLs here for you so that you can then dive into what those are as you're building out your business continuity and disaster recovery plans.
Yeah, this is a really good section to cover, Rin. It's still surprising, I think, how many, and hopefully it's more of the, well, hopefully it probably is more of the smaller organization, but definitely the more of the less mature organization that actually has a disaster recovery plan, or more importantly, they have one, but testing it. So when we see the number of companies that have been impacted by, unfortunately, the cryptoware that just takes the documents, encrypts them, and then demands recovery through payment of Bitcoin, a lot of that is because their disaster recovery plan wasn't tested. They didn't know their backups couldn't actually restore the data, or they didn't back the data up often enough. They still have to pay and hope they get it back, right? So I think with it just being so prolific now, so many companies being impacted by cyber security incidents, and not even nation state attackers or advanced attackers, just unfortunate drive-by, like catching a cold. Some of these viruses just hit you. Yeah. And if you catch it and you're unlucky, it's like your neighbor had a fire and it jumped to your house. It's just not the right thing to think of, but if you don't think of it, you are more than likely to be business impacted than if you hadn't taken the steps and the time. Again, this is one of those things that we do in the quiet times, is plan and prepare for if it should ever happen again. And you're right about the cloud. Having your documents in the cloud means they're automatically backed up and restored. Having cloud services instead of servers in data centers, even in AWS or Azure or any other cloud service where you're running servers, they are still servers and they can go down. So you need a disaster recovery plan of, can I restore them? Can I back them up? How fast does that, how long does that take? And what impact does that have? And that will take pulling across the whole company, because it's not normally the SOC team that has to do it, but they're unfortunately the ones going to give the bad news to the team that does have to do it. So again, understanding, like, from when we tell you this is a problem, how quickly you're going to respond, that's what you can log here as well.
Yeah, and to that end, we do have this section, applicable policies and standards, and this is for, those that are viewing these sessions to understand they can add their own links, their own areas where they've got applicable policies that they've already snapped to. So we've thought about that as well, right? Like, there's going to be supporting URLs or links and things that they want to include into this section of the page. Please, by all means, you make sure that you're applying those here. Make sure that everyone knows where that information is stored, how to access it, and then they need to be reviewing it constantly so that they know how to apply it. And I think you're right. There's so many things going on right now. Crypto, mining is definitely one of them. Some of the viruses and things we've seen, absolutely. And so when you have to step into a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan, I mean, it's all hands on deck. Everyone is participating. Everyone has to know their part. And if they don't, that is really, truly when a business is most impacted.
That is not the time that you want to start making up the procedure. That's not what Agile is about, right? That's not Agile at all. If you're having to think on your feet at that point, it's wrong. Yeah, and the other one is think about crowdsourcing this. Not any one single person can think of every event that might happen that might bring the business down. So crowdsource this as part of your security communications with the business. Is say to them, we're doing our best to protect you, but you tell us what you think would happen. It's the what if scenario. What if this wasn't available to you tomorrow? Do you know what impact that would have on your business? You tell us, because we might not be aware, we might not be protecting that, but it could be the most critical thing to your day job. And if we're not aware of that, we can't protect you and we can't practice recovery at a quick period of time. I always go back to things like firefighters and real life, not cyber world, but physical world. they practice on a regular basis how to evacuate a hospital, how to deal with an airport, how to handle train stations and businesses, busy crowds. Like, if you don't know how that's going to happen and how all the different services were going to work together, it would be an honest nightmare when something happens. And so I'm really glad that this professional services do it. And I think this gives you the opportunity that if you aren't already mature in this area, as you'll attest with the maturity model, you really do want to aim to become the best you can with the resources you have. And there's always a chance for everybody to get better.
Absolutely. This section attests to that as well. And even though it's small and there's just an overview here, it really is about, adding your business continuity and disaster recovery plans here, whether that is pulling out the information and adding it into this section so that, they don't have to go find it, or it's linking to it if it needs to be, protected or otherwise. And so we've built out this section. There's not a lot here, right? More of the continuity process is what it is that you should be doing when you're thinking about business continuity and disaster recovery. So that's really what the high level process is. This is more on that. Now that we have our processes and they're defined, where do we store them? And this is that section for that to store them. And so that really does conclude kind of this overall section of our business, processes and procedures at a very deep level. And I hope, I think there's been some good conversation between you and I, Richard. I think we've really called out some things here that need to be considered during the type of maturity and an up level within your SOC operations, within any SOC operations for that matter. A lot of times this is the section that sometimes is an afterthought. When it should be kind of a forethought, right? That, as you called out, in the quiet moments when things are quiet, you're trying to build out those processes and procedures. This should certainly be at the forefront of that, considering that and making sure that you understand, one, how is it defined, and then two, how do you action on it? And how do you tie your people to it so that they know how to action on it? And then how do you review it? How do you constantly make sure that you're evaluating it and maturing it over time?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Rin, for writing it, putting it together, and taking the time today to talk about it. We've got a couple more videos to go in this series. So in the next video, join us and we'll talk about the technology, processes, and procedures. Thank you very much.